Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and there's been some huge buffs to healers. Let's buff the underperforming healers or buff the underperforming hero builds that people are not using to try and make them more usable, because you'll see a lot of the hero builds that again might not be as popular are getting changes. But first of all, let's start off with Preservation Evoker, who arguably received some of the biggest changes depending on the content you're doing. So first of all, healing of all spells and abilities increased by 4%. You have to keep in mind, for Preservation Evoker, this does not mean flat 4% healing increases, because there are certain talents or certain spells that rely on like incoming damage that are not going to be buffed by this. Things like Golden Hour and things like Rewind. In terms of other buffs, Living Flame healing is increased by 30%, which is absolutely massive for content like Mythic Plus, where you're running Chrono Warden and you have a bunch of talents and interactions with Living Flame, things like After Image. So this buff is going to be, this is insane in my opinion. Spirit Bloom healing is increased by 20%, Echo base healing is increased by 100%, so that is the base healing. This only affects the raw healing, not how strong copied spells are, which makes absolute sense. So what does this mean for Preservation Evoker? If you look at the Mythic rating HPS charts, and we'll talk about this at the end of the video in terms of rating Mythic Plus, but you'll see Preservation Evoker is a little bit dipping, but honestly, the balance in terms of HPS for healers is so close. Holy Priest is actually popping off right now because it did receive certain buffs in the last patch or the last tuning changes, but 75 percentile or 95 percentile, you'll see something similar here. So in terms of rating, you're probably getting somewhere close to 6% overall HPS buff, which will probably place Preservation Evoker much closer to that top HPS healer list. And I think that's going to be really fun, and it needs a bit more of an incentive for players to pick up. So around 6% raid buff, which is actually pretty decent. And it's important to remember that right now, as a Preservation Evoker in raids, you will be, or the most popular hero build is going to be Flameshaper. You'll see a lot of these Preservation Evokers in terms of top logs using Flameshaper. And when it comes to Mythic Plus as Preservation Evoker, Chrono Warden is going to be the king. And a lot of the changes that are happening in terms of buffs to Preservation Evoker, again, there is a difference between Mythic Plus and raid healing breakdown. For example, this is a random log for an 18 Floodgate for a Preservation Evoker, and you can see here that Living Flame accounts for a huge portion of your overall healing, and Living Flame is getting a substantial buff and a bunch of other things. And if you're looking at raid, you're looking at around 6% HPS increase, and if you're looking at Mythic Plus, you can probably double that value, and this is a very significant HPS buff to Preservation Evokers, especially when it comes to Mythic Plus content. So if you're a Pres Evoker right now, you're probably extremely happy in terms of what's happening in this tuning patch, because it is so substantial. And now let's move on to Holy Paladin, and there is buffs to Lightsmith, and it's not surprising at all, because at the start of the video I said Blizzard is trying to buff underrepresented or underperforming hero builds, and right now Blizzard probably is looking at Holy Paladin, and most of the Holy Paladins are running Herald of the Sun both in raids and Mythic Plus content, so they're buffing Lightsmith. In terms of Blessing of the Forge, healing is increased by 15%, and Hammer and Anvil healings increased by 20. If you look currently at the most popular hero builds, again, I talked about the fact this is Mythic rating, and this is, again, a lot of Holy Paladins are going to be running Herald of the Sun. It is one of the most popular hero builds right now. I don't think Lightsmith is unplayable in all forms of content. I think this Lightsmith buff, it's not significant. I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of changes, but I think it's very interesting to see how Holy Paladin hero builds changed over time, because in Season 1, Lightsmith was very popular, in Season 2, Herald of the Sun is a lot more popular. And this kind of has split the community, because I know there's a lot of players who, for example, enjoy Herald of the Sun, and they're really happy that it is the meta build right now. And there's quite a few players who also enjoy Lightsmith, and I think there is a decent divide. I want to know your opinion on which hero build you enjoy more as a Holy Paladin. In terms of these buffs, again, I don't expect significant changes to happen, but we'll see. And now let's go to my boy Restoration Shaman, and all of the buffs that happen to Resto Shaman are to do with Farseer, which makes sense, because in terms of all of the data that's available when it comes to Resto Shamans and Mythic Plus and raids, Farseer accounts for a minuscule percentage. Now, that does not mean that Farseer is not playable or not viable. There are Resto Shamans who are doing really high Mythic Plus content as Farseers, and they can make it work. They're looking at these changes, and they're probably dancing right now, because these are substantial buffs to Farseer. So first of all, Elemental Reverb now increases Riptide healing by 20% instead of 10. In terms of Maelstrom Supremacy now increases the healing of Healing Wave, Healing Surge, Wellspring, Downpour, and Chain Heal by 25% instead of 15. In terms of Offering from Beyond now reduces the cooldown of Riptide by 3 seconds instead of 2 seconds. Primordial Capacity now increases the maximum mana by 10%, which is actually interesting, because they're buffing the mana for Farseer, they're not really doing anything for Totemic mana. Again, something to discuss. In terms of Hydro Bubble absorption now increased by 25%, and Hydro Bubble now lasts 15 seconds instead of 10 seconds. And I feel like all of these buffs to Farseer are extremely wanted because of the representation rates. Not a lot of players are playing Farseer right now as Resto Shamans, but I know there's a lot of Totemic Resto Shamans who are looking for any excuse to swap to Farseer or try out Farseer because they're getting bored of the Totemic playstyle, and maybe before they felt like Farseer was too much work for the reward that you're getting. And now this would be the time to try out Farseer if you enjoy or want something different. And oh boy, these hero builds could not be any more different in terms of the gameplay options that they provide. And I genuinely feel, let's assume Farseer becomes a better HPS option. I'm not saying that's happening, but let's assume if that was the truth. I still feel majority of Resto Shamans will still be playing Totemic, except for those who want the min-max stuff, but I still think Totemic would be the most popular option because of the streamlined gameplay that it provides. Think about this, as a Totemic Resto Shaman, you have so much passive healing or healing coming from totems, it's almost like you have these training wheels on. For example, Healing Stream Totem. This totem gets turbo buffed by a Totemic talent reactivity, which is still broken and providing more healing for Healing Stream Totem than the tooltip suggests. So Healing Stream Totem becomes a really strong option, which doesn't require a huge amount of optimization if you really think about this. Also, certain totems are going to shoot out free chain heals because of lively totems, and on top of that you also have Surging Totem, which in my opinion is an infinitely better iteration of Healing Rain, and all of a sudden you can probably do something like a Mythic Plus content and just press your totems and do a huge amount of healing without having to do anything else. Again, I'm over exaggerating, I'm just trying to showcase the power of totems with Totemic, the power of passive healing that you can do. And then if you go to Farseer, it's the complete polar opposite. It's all about casting, it's all about pressing spells, because for example, Healing Stream Totem, you don't have reactivity as Farseer, so your Healing Stream Totem is not really all that amazing, and a lot of Farseer Resto Shamans are going to be using Cloudburst. For Cloudburst to be good, you need to be casting spells. Ancestors, which is your bread and butter ability for Farseer, if you don't cast, they're not going to do anything. So it's all about how you optimize your Restoration Shaman. It's all about casting spells, optimizing those ancestor windows, again building up your Cloudburst. Bit of a disclaimer, it's not like you can't play Cloudburst Totem as Totemic Resto Shaman. I actually prefer Cloudburst as Totemic in raid content, but I play Healing Stream when it comes to Totemic in Mythic Plus. And we also have to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is Healing Rain for Farseer. I know there's a lot of Totemic Resto Shamans who just got used to Surging Totem so much, and I genuinely feel like Surging Totem is an infinitely better iteration of Healing Rain, so going to Farseer and going back to the old version of Healing Rain does not feel all that appealing. Now, in Season 1, there were a lot of Farseer Resto Shamans who didn't pay a whole lot of attention to Healing Rain. Now, in Season 2, Blizzard just made a tier set around Healing Rain and things became a little bit different. I would have loved to see more iterations or things being done about Healing Rain for Farseer specifically. Now, I know there's ways to play around Healing Rain as Farseer and things like that, but I generally feel like there could be a mini rework, or should be a mini rework happening to Farseer. But what I'm trying to say here is that these two hero builds are a lot different and they're going to appeal to different types of people. Farseer is a lot more interactive. It's a lot more about casting abilities yourself, optimizing ancestors, building up Cloudburst and all those things. It really depends on the content you're doing, and Totemic is a lot more, there's a tons of passive healing that is coming from your totems, and you can press those totems and then you have a lot of time in between to do damage or healing depending on what is needed. Again, we talked about training wheels that you get with Totemic. Those training wheels are taken away when you play Farseer, and that can be a little bit daunting for new Restoration Shamans. And in terms of which hero build is going to be better, honestly, I'm not quite sure, because for example, in terms of Mythic rating, there isn't a whole lot of Farseer Mythic logs to compare and try to decide whether it's going to be better than Totemic or not, and this is something that I'm going to be personally trying out myself when these changes go live. I will try out Farseer, see how it feels, because I haven't played a lot of Farseer this season. I've been playing Totemic mainly because there was no reason for me to swap to Farseer. Now, with these changes, I know there's going to be a lot of Totemic Resto Shamans who will be more inclined about playing Farseer because they were looking for any reason to swap. Farseer is going to be feeling more rewarding, because that was one of the issues at the start, because the amount of effort you put in with Farseer, it didn't feel like the reward was justified, and that's probably going to change a little bit. I still think Totemic is going to be the most popular build right now because of the reasons that I mentioned, because of the gameplay that it provides, and I think people just are kind of more leaning towards a simpler, more streamlined gameplay, or a hero build that has a lot of quality of life built in. But when these changes go live, I'll do more testing, I'll try out Farseer. I know there will be people trying out different talent builds, cooking up different talent builds because of the changes that happen here. There's a lot of emphasis on Riptide and all those things. We'll try it out. At the end of the day, if you like Totemic, I think a lot of people will stick with Totemic. And if you're looking for any chance to swap to Farseer, I think this will be the time to do it if you enjoy that gameplay. So what do these changes mean when it comes to mythic rating? This is looking at 75 percentile. It's somewhat similar in the 95 percentile and things like that. And in terms of pure HPS, this is real play information. The difference between the best HPS healer and the worst HPS healer is not all that significant. The balance is not all that bad. And what's happening right now, Preservation Evoker is getting a decent buff when it comes to rating. It's looking at around that 6%, which means that Preservation Evoker could possibly climb much closer to that top HPS leaderboard. And I think that's going to be very, very enjoyable for the 5 Preservation Evokers that play this game. I'm hoping that there's going to be more of an incentive for players to try Preservation Evoker, because for the longest time, in my opinion, the effort was not worth the reward, especially considering you also have range limitations. And in terms of other healer changes, Holy Paladin received buffs to Lightsmith. Now, Herald of the Sun is the most popular build right now in all forms of content, and the buffs to Lightsmith, I don't think they're going to change a whole lot, but we'll have to see. I like to know your opinion in terms of which playstyle or hero build you prefer, Lightsmith or Herald of the Sun, because I think the community is relatively divided on that. And in terms of other changes, Restoration Shaman received buffs to Farseer only. Now, this chart, majority of this is coming from Totemic Resto Shamans, because it is by far the most playable hero build right now. So I'm not even sure how the buffs to Farseer are going to impact this chart right now, because there might be some new builds being cooked up and people experimenting with stuff, but we'll have to see. I'll try out more Farseer gameplay as Resto Shaman in the future, but I think the Farseer buffs are very, very much welcome. And if you're a Resto Shaman who was on the fence in terms of trying out Farseer, this would be the time to do it. Now let's talk about Mythic Plus and meta healers. If we look at real play information in terms of the top 2,000 Mythic Plus keys each week, you can see that from the start of Season 2 in the War Within, there was only one healer that was perceived as meta, and that is Discipline Priest, or specifically Oracle Discipline Priest. And the pessimist in me, I don't think anything is really going to change, even though there has been substantial buff to certain healers out there. For example, Preservation Evoker, we talked about the raid performance, we talked about the fact that these buffs are probably going to be around 6% in raid. You can probably double that value when it comes to Mythic Plus, because there's just a lot more emphasis on Living Flame and all those things. So Preservation could arguably become one of those healers that has an insane healing throughput. Even before these buffs, Preservation was still very much playable. It's just that it has a very small community, and most of the people are playing Oracle Discipline Priest because the shielding is just so powerful. Oracle Discipline Priest allows your DPS to play like plebs because they have this shield. It's just that Oracle Discipline Priest provides such a big safety net to your group, and I don't think that's going to change. I still think Oracle Discipline Priest is going to be the meta healer that most groups are going to invite, and if you're pugging for that rank 1 title, or just pugging high-end Mythic Plus keys, I think it's still going to be relatively hard to get invited if you're not Oracle Discipline Priest for the reasons that I mentioned. We talked about utility, PI, Mind Suit, and all those things, but in terms of Restoration Shaman, Farseer is getting a buff, and I think there will be Resto Shamans who will try out Farseer. And if you want to look at the differences in terms of gameplay when it comes to Farseer and Totemic, check out the chapters in this video. I talk about the massive differences when it comes to playing Totemic Resto Shaman and playing Farseer Resto Shaman. It is very, very different, and it's going to attract different type of people. Again, Resto Shaman is doing pretty well in Mythic Plus, especially in that physical comp. Totemic Resto Shaman has been really shining in that physical comp because it does provide Sky Fury. Your Surging Totem feels very nice to use because you get a lot of value out of it, because as I mentioned, people are stacked. We'll have to see how Farseer is going to feel after the buffs. We talked about the Holy Paladin buffs to Lightsmith. Again, I'm not sure if this is going to do a whole lot, but we'll have to see. And again, this chart is real player information, but there is a snowball effect in here. Once a healer is deemed meta, a lot of people swap over and they play it. I actually genuinely think a lot of the healers are capable of doing really high-end Mythic Plus keys, and if you enjoy any of these healers, you can push them. I do want to touch or talk a little bit more about Preservation Evoker, because I think it's getting some substantial increases when it comes to Mythic Plus content. But the pessimist in me won't even be surprised if this representation for Preservation Evokers doesn't even change after these buffs, because of multiple different reasons that I talked in my previous videos, in terms of the difficulty of play, in terms of range limitations, which are not deal breaker for any top end player. If they want to optimize this, spec players can pick up Preservation Evoker and they can have a good time. Now, the buffs to Preservation Evoker in terms of Mythic Plus are extremely substantial, and I think if you're playing Preservation Evoker right now, you're going to be extremely happy in terms of what's happening, because we talked about the fact that Prez for a very long time has been one of those healers where the effort did not equate the reward. So I'm really happy that Prez is getting buffed. I don't really think the meta is going to change all that much. I still think Oracle Discipline Priest is going to be very much dominant, unless Preservation Evoker after these changes is going to be miles ahead of everyone else in terms of the healing throughput. And even then, it does not guarantee your healing spec is going to become meta. A perfect example of this is Restoration Druid. I've been talking up Resto Druid for such a long time, because I feel if you know how to play Resto Druid, you can take care of any healing check in the game. Raw type of fights like Candle King, they're a joke to Resto Druid who knows how to play. And if you've been pushing keys, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And yet, Resto Druid is not meta because it doesn't fit into that comp as easily. Balanced Druid is really strong and all those things. And that's not even talking about the fact that you also have to compete with the shielding and the safety net that Oracle provides. So I really hope that Preservation Evoker, there's going to be more players playing it, because it's going to pump healing with these changes. But I'm just not sure if it's going to become meta pick. I think the buffs to these healers are very much warranted. I'm happy for the Prez Evoker. I'm happy for Farseer, Resto, Shaman, because again, Blizzard is looking at hero builds that people are not playing and trying to make it more attractive to play. I think there will be Totemic Resto Shamans who are looking for any excuse to try and play Farseer. Actually, when I think about it, Farseer Resto Shaman was somewhat similar to Preservation Evoker in terms of the effort not always equaling the reward when compared to Totemic, because Totemic, in my eyes, was a lot easier to play. But now with these changes to Farseer, I think it'll be very interesting to try and see how it feels. Let me know how you feel about this video. Let me know if you're happy about these changes. Let me know if you think Blizzard missed out on some of the changes for other healers or other hero builds. And again, guys, if you like these videos, like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Thank you, guys, and I'll see you in my next video.